think if most youth pastors spent 10% of their time thinking about strategy, they would honestly have much improved ministries. It's something that I think most people assume is not a youth pastor's skill set. We're like the fun people, we're the goofy people, we're the that. But I think we really can be strategists, and we need to lean more into that. I had a mentor one time that said, you have to give people clear tracks to run on. And I think that's a great system to think through when you're thinking strategy. Is it's strategy for you, but it's strategy for your leaders. And once you lay out those tracks, they can just go, but you have to do that work to build those tracks. And I think strategy is different for different seasons you're in ministry. Me, I just finished my second year at Eastside. And so my first 2 years of strategy was very different than the last couple of years of strategy at my old church that I was at for 7 years. So coming in as the new high school pastor at Eastside, my strategy was trying to find what was unhealthy and make it healthy, find what wasn't working and start to make it work. That sounds really simplistic, but it honestly helped me a ton. And the last thing that was a big strategy piece was recruiting the amount of leaders for the ministry size you want to have, not the ministry size you currently have. And that is also something that one of my other ministry mentors, Kurt Johnson, always said to me, was like, you need to recruit for the amount of the size ministry you want to have, not the size ministry you have currently, which obviously don't go crazy and have like 100 leaders and 50 students. The idea is always have some that are as co-leaders in the wings that are ready to keep building groups and keep growing the ministry. And so those are some strategy pieces that really help a lot. And then finding your calendar flow that helps. Finding those moments where it's going to spike the attendance so that your momentum and growth keep going up instead of just putting things in random places, thinking through how will this bring people in? And then how do we have the funnel keep going down into a more committed experience with HSM? So we fill the funnel in a lot of our ministries, but then we don't really think about how they keep moving down the funnel into groups, into real experiences with Jesus, into real relationships with their leaders, into real relationships with one another. And I think just asking yourself, does my program accomplish that, is a big question to think through when it comes to strategy.
Listeners, today you are in for a treat. We have Sarah Aungst from Eastside Christian Church coming to share some wisdom of youth ministry in her years of experience, all the way from Los Angeles, California. So this is going to be one that you do not want to miss. We get into a lot of great stuff. Check it out and enjoy.
For sure.
Just keep going, because ministry's freaking hard. We just wrapped, we just this last Wednesday had our last official, Wednesday night of the spring, but that was like my 7th school year. And I'm like, so it's just been so fun to see, and if you're not careful, you just kind of hit the speed bumps and keep going and wake up one day and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. At least I don't know if you've ever felt that way.
Yeah, no, for sure. Honestly, like that's why I said yes to coming on this podcast and talking about stuff, is because honestly, I used to know a lot of youth pastors. I grew up, and I still have a lot of friends that are youth pastors, and I have a lot of, people that I grew up with in ministry that are still doing ministry, but they're all older than me now, honestly, and or much younger and just starting out, because a lot of the people in my age range honestly have bowed out, and just kind of have gotten exhausted and discouraged and wanted to do something else. And so I was like, maybe through this, I'll meet some people, we'll get to connect more. It'll be great to just like get out there a little bit more and meet some fellow youth pastors that are really grinding and doing their best. And yeah, I think locally, I have definitely still a handful of people through my family that I grew up with at Saddleback and started serving with and all that. And then obviously at Eastside Church, my people there, but all the other like people that I used to connect with through my college and stuff like that, a lot of them have like retired from ministry way too young and have just moved on to other things. So I was like, man, it'd be cool to just chat with other people in ministry and get to know some other people that are really still doing it and giving it their all and finding ways to make that sustainable. Because I've totally seen that burnout out here in California as well.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's just like, there's probably a lot of reasons, and I'm curious, we can get into it here, why you feel like that is. But it's just like, we just run so hard. And like most people get, and a lot of people get into ministry because they're like, I love working with people. I love the gospel. Jesus has changed my life. I want to help other people experience that. But then they like get into this thing and they're like, I don't know how to lead. Like, I don't know how to build a team. I don't know how to manage my time. And they just get just buried with all this stuff.
Totally,
And
totally.
then they're just like, I don't know how to do this. It's not that I don't want to do it anymore. I just don't know how to sustainably do this. So
Hmm.
I'm curious, Sarah, for you, like, what does that look like for you? Maybe just talk us through a little bit, like how you got into ministry,
Yeah.
and what that's looked like for you to kind of continue to step into what you're doing now. So I would love to
Yeah.
hear a little bit of your backstory.
For sure. Yeah. I am so fortunate the Lord really revealed to me young that he wanted me to go into ministry. And so I grew up in like a Christian, Orange County Christian family, which is what I call families that like going to church and like being nice and serving and stuff, but it wasn't a part of every single conversation we had. But we definitely went to church regularly, and we went to church at a church that really focused on serving. And so we would always serve and do things. And when I was in high school and junior high, I really started getting into serving with the youth ministry and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I started serving a lot in junior high ministry when I was a senior in high school. And I just absolutely loved it. I kind of stumbled into it because I really felt like for the first time in my life, the Lord was redirecting me from spending so much time on sports to like what was next. I didn't really know, and I was ready to find out. And I kind of knew I wasn't going to spend more time on homework or anything like that because I was already given enough attention to that. And so I just kind of looked at the other areas of my life, and the other area that I would spend a lot of my time on was church. And so, yeah, so I kind of reached out to my youth pastors, and it was funny because they were really excited to have me and I was very hesitant. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like junior high ministry. I don't know how this will go, but I want to give it a try. And then I just fell in love with it. I absolutely loved it, and I couldn't get enough of it. And so I started serving probably the end of my junior year, and then that summer I went to every single event. Which I grew up at Saddleback Church, and so the youth ministry events during the summer was insane. Like the amount of events that they used to do, and they still do a lot of things, but so many. And I went to every single one just as a volunteer because I loved it and I couldn't get enough. And then I started serving my senior year, and I started serving with a life group, and I was actually leading the small group as a senior. And yeah, and I loved it. And to use that SHAPE acronym, spiritual gifts, heart, ability,
Mm.
personality, experience. If people have heard that out there, that is, I just kind of felt really like my shape just fit. But even still, I wasn't thinking about going into ministry vocationally. I was just thinking, oh, I love this. This is something I enjoy doing. But everyone in ministry is poor and has no time. And so I'm not interested in doing it for work.
I remember
And to
when
be
I told
honest,
my mom I was like thinking about going into ministry, and I was like dating. I think I was maybe engaged to my wife at the time.
mhm.
And I was like, Mom, I'm really, because I went to Kansas State University, was working in sales at the time. And I was like, I think God's calling me to go into ministry. My mom, I'm in the kitchen. I'll never forget this. She's like, do you want to eat? Do you want to have a family? I'm like, what the heck? Like, my mom like loves the
Oh my
Lord. I'm
gosh,
like, that
that is
is
good.
not the answer. I'm like, I don't need this right now, Mom. I need you to be like, yes, do what God's calling you to do. It's just like so practical. Versus like,
Totally.
and then I immediately like, oh my gosh, am I going to starve to death? Am I going to be able to pay my bills, put gas in my car?
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No,
I
that is
connect.
so
I
good.
connect with
That is
that.
so relatable. Yeah, that is so relatable. And it's funny because, I mean, that's a different experience of you going from sales into ministry. But my parents had the same response, but they're probably more thinking like, you're this high schooler that doesn't know what's going on, and we need you to make sure you can provide for yourself. But anyway, that came later. But
Yeah.
yeah, so anyway, the mentors in my life kind of started saying stuff like, don't you think you should do this for your career? And I was like, no, you're crazy. That's really not what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a teacher, and I'll serve in my church. And every woman in my family has been a teacher. And so I was like, that's what I'm going to do, which is not so far off the beaten path. It was funny because in my head, I'm like, that's a totally different thing, but it's relatively similar in some ways. But yeah, so anyway, I was serving, loving it, and still just being really resistant. So I feel like the Lord really had to get my attention. And so one day I was just walking out of the gym after serving, and I had kind of this experience. And the only way I can explain it to people is it's kind of like this highlight reel that the Lord brought to mind of all these opportunities I had had to serve and to grow as a leader, and all the mentors that had poured into me, and all the experiences with the Lord in high school where he'd really grown me and shaped me. And I kind of felt like that was a moment where he was really trying to get my attention and be like, no, I literally have made you for this. I want you to do this. And
Wow.
so, yeah, so I don't think everyone has to have a call like that. And I always am careful to share this story because I don't want people to count themselves out. But I felt like I was being so stubborn. The Lord had to step in that way and be like, no, 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 this is it. So I jokingly call it my Cinderella moment because I had to acknowledge that the shoe just fit. And then from then on, I just went for it. And I had to convince my parents like you did. And they were like, you need to sit down with Katie Edwards, because she was one of the junior high pastors at the time at Saddleback, and ask her what it's like to be a mom, to be a wife, to provide for yourself. And they had all those same concerns of like, are you going to be able to eat? And so once I did my homework, I was able to convince them to let them change my major before I went to Biola University to the Christian Ministries major. And I just full set on it, and I never looked back. And that's how I got started. And that's because of that, I was able to really like focus on growing and developing myself during college for ministry. So when I graduated, I started working in my first full-time ministry job before I even graduated.
Wow.
And it was like a very fast track experience, but I look back on it now and I wouldn't have had it any other way, because I'm coming up on next year will be 10 years in full-time ministry. And I just have so much gratitude for that. I'm like getting a little emotional thinking about it because it's been such a cool journey, but that's how it all started. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay. So now tell us a little bit about the church you're at right now, a little bit about what you do, your role there, and just a couple things that God's up to as far as what you're doing at Eastside.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm at Eastside Church up in Anaheim in Orange County, California, close to Disneyland is what I say to people who are from out of state. And yeah, it's a great church. We would definitely say like our values are, reaching out to people that are far from God. And we're really strategic in what we do, which I absolutely love. I'm very strategy minded. That's how I tick. And so I love that we just really are intentional about how do we build momentum? How do we reach people? And also, how are we still the church? We really find a balance with that of like reaching people that are far from God, but being church and really making sure our teaching is accurate and bringing truth to people's lives. And I really try to accomplish that at HSM. So I'm the high school director for Eastside, which means I'm our Anaheim campus's actual high school like pastor, but I also help all of our other high school ministries at our other campuses. So it keeps me busy. I'm always busy, which is fun. And I'm always trying to think of all of our students at all of our locations, which isn't the easiest because we have Anaheim, we have Las Vegas. So those kids are very different from ours. And we have Park Rapids and we have a few others, but those are like showing the extreme differences in our demographic when it comes to our students. So I really am trying to, basically develop curriculum and messages that reach all of them and stuff like that. But we're a big ministry that's all about inviting people to come and experience who Jesus is. And we really try to be creative with that. We do invite nights once a month. And those are just event nights where we do something totally different every single month. And we really push that vision. And yeah, it's been really fun. So that's what I do at Eastside is high school specific. I used to do junior high at my last church. And so I've been a little bit everywhere. And I know usually people are like diehard junior high or diehard high school. And I thought I would have been diehard junior high until the Lord was kind of like time to move into a new position 2 years ago. And that was high school at Eastside.
Some people just built different. Yeah. One of my first few episodes on here was with Josh Griffin. And he was like,
oh man, that guy, he's my high school pastor.
About middle schoolers. He's just like, I just freaking love middle schoolers. They're crazy. So we talked for like 20 minutes about just like how fun it is to work with the different age groups. So that's a fun listen.
Yeah.
For if you haven't listened to that episode or for anybody listening to this wanting to go back.
That's so good. I love that guy. He was my high school pastor.
Like strategy kind of makes you tick. One of my questions I had for, you to chew on, is looking at challenges that youth pastors face. And I would love to hear some from your thoughts, but just before we get into that, I'd love to talk a little bit about, you just mentioned like how important having a strategy is. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? Like if you're sitting here, like, I know what we're doing, but like, what are we doing? Like, I know like we're showing up, like, have you ever felt that? Like, I'm thinking everybody in ministries, like, has felt that tension of like, we're doing the program, but I feel like I'm just like kind of running the play. And I'm like, man, where's this thing going? So what's some wisdom that you've got about how you guys have thought through developing a clear strategy for, like you said, part one of reaching lost people. But part two of that is like, now we actually need to do church and disciple each other and help each other grow in community and grow in their spiritual formation, which takes a really clear strategy to do. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how do you develop strategy with your ministry?
Yeah, totally. I think this is such a good question. I think if most youth pastors spent like 10% of their time thinking about strategy, they would honestly have much improved ministries. It's something that I think most people assume is not a youth pastor's skill set. We're like the fun people, we're the goofy people, we're the this, the that. But I think we really can be strategists, and we need to lean more into that, And I had a mentor one time that said, you have to give people clear tracks to run on. And I think that's a great system to think through when you're thinking strategy. It's strategy for you, but it's strategy for your leaders. And once you lay out those tracks, they can just go and go and go, but you have to do that work to build those tracks, and I think strategy is different for different seasons you're in ministry. For me, I just finished my second year at Eastside. And so my first 2 years of strategy was very different than, the last couple of years of strategy at my old church that I was at for 7 years, And so coming in as the new, high school pastor at Eastside, my strategy was trying to find what was unhealthy and make it healthy, find what wasn't working and start to make it work. That sounds really simplistic, but it honestly helped me a ton. And the last thing that was a big strategy piece was recruiting the amount of leaders for the ministry size you want to have, not the ministry size you currently have. And that is also something that one of my other ministry mentors, Kurt Johnson, always said to me, was like, you need to recruit for the amount of the size ministry you want to have, not the size ministry you have currently, which obviously don't go crazy and have like 100 leaders and 50 students, but the idea is always have some that are as co-leaders in the wings that are ready to keep building groups and keep growing the ministry. And so those are some strategy pieces that really help a lot. And then finding your calendar flow, your strategy with your calendar flow that helps, finding those moments where it's going to spike the attendance so that your momentum and growth keep going up instead of just kind of putting things in random places, thinking through, how will this bring people in? And then how do we have the funnel keep going down into a more committed experience with HSM? So we fill the funnel a lot in a lot of our ministries, but then we don't really think about how they keep moving down the funnel into groups, into real experiences with Jesus, into real relationships with their leaders, into real relationships with one another. And I think just asking yourself, does my program accomplish that, is a big question to think through when it comes to strategy. So strategy can be a lot of different layers. And I think there's really simple thoughts that you can think through and build a strategy for you. Have you built the tracks for your leaders and the people around you to run on? That includes the staff that you're leading. Like, do they confidently know where they're going? And then also think through the idea that healthy things grow. So instead of focusing on growing, focus on making things healthy. And I think that mindset will help build really good strategy that actually is effective and is also, it's a different shift for a leader too. That's I think a healthier perspective on growth is like, oh, I'm focusing on making this healthy. I'm not straining and doing all this work to make things grow. That's where the Lord shows up, and that's where he does his work. And so I think with strategy, we have to keep in mind that perspective of, it does come down to us to really express what we're going to do and how we're going to do it to the people around us. But as leaders, we still need to be thinking through, healthy things grow. My job is to make it healthy. His job, the Lord's job, is to grow and to do the fruit that he can. And I think that helps with some of the stuff we're talking about earlier with burnout and stuff like that.
Hey, real quick, I just want to say thank you so much for listening and watching this podcast, wherever it is, on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're watching this. And I just want to ask a big personal ask of you. And that is, one, if you are watching this and you're not subscribed, to please hit the subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on upcoming content coming your way, resources, videos, trainings, all those things. It does our show a huge service if you like the episode, if you subscribe, and please, if this is helpful for you, share it with a friend, someone in ministry, another youth leader, another youth pastor. That's how we grow this in order to impact and encourage more leaders in ministry. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just at an all staff meeting. We had this dude from Chick-fil-A come in, and he gave
Hmm.
this like gloriously cheesy PowerPoint presentation, like
I love it.
it was like, I love it was awesome. We
Yeah.
made fun of it a little bit, but the
Yeah.
principles are really good. And he's got this slide in there that he's like, it's not about the chicken, it's about the people. It's like,
Right,
okay, like
right.
we're
Of
all kind of like,
course.
all right, like, but he's like, what's your chicken? They're
Mm.
like, and how do you like get out of the mindset of like, it's not just about the program, it's not just about like that, but like that it's really about how you treat people, and knowing like, or even just like
Hmm.
the Tim Ferriss thing. Like he came out with this blog like 20 years ago that was all about like creating, like he says, all you need for the rest of your life is 1,000 raving fans. And he just says like,
Hmm.
hey, if I can get 1,000 people that are just obsessed with my blog and my podcast and my books, like then they'll take care of the rest, because they're people that are completely bought into what we're doing. And I've thought through that and chewed on that question a lot, like as a student pastor, like how do we develop like truly like raving fans of what God is doing? And I think the way that we do that is how we shepherd and care. Like we're not in the chicken
Hmm.
business. We're not in developing
Hmm.
products. We're not
Thank
just about,
goodness.
yeah, I know, right? Thank God, like that's a competitive world. But like, but like really, it's like we, like our thing needs to be like, and how healthy are our kids? Like how much are they
Yeah.
cared for? How do we shepherd them? How do we
Hmm.
meet them where they're at? Like, of course, have a great fun experience and have, good processes, but um, really at the bottom of the funnel is like real authentic relationships where people are like,
Uh-huh.
hey, these leaders, these adults, these peers care about me,
Hmm.
like, and I've got the tools and
Exactly.
resources to know and follow Jesus in order to multiply. So I love that. And one thought I had as you were sharing is really kind of what you're talking about, of like what you did coming into the ministry was like looking, hey, what's unhealthy, what's healthy, is really the
Hmm.
principle, like that law of limitations, of like
Hmm.
how on, and that was kind of like this thing developed on like assembly lines. Like you don't have a problem with the whole assembly line. There's just a bottleneck somewhere where things aren't working. Or
Totally.
thinking through that funnel, like, hey, I think some ministries really kill it at getting kids in the door, and that's awesome. But like, they're really not. There's something happening going down that funnel that maybe they might not be aware of. You're like, why are we not producing students that are multiplying their lives? Or maybe you're really
Exactly.
focused at the bottom. Like, all we do is really super intentional discipleship, but you're not seeing enough at the top. Like,
Hmm.
how would you counsel? And I'm asking genuinely for myself, but
Hmm.
also to hear your thoughts, but also for anyone listening. How would you, from as a strategist, somebody who's got skills there, think through addressing like, hey, how do you pinpoint what are things to measure, what are things to look for in that process of moving kids through?
Yeah.
Hey, this is how you can identify where you might be breaking down, because I
Hmm.
think that gives focus. And that's something
Hmm.
that's a skill set that like most leaders aren't, most ministries don't grow because they're not thinking like that. So I would
Yeah.
love to hear your thoughts on like, how do you identify those areas that are maybe unhealthy, broken, in your ministry?
For sure. I think, I think let's just stick with like the funnel metaphor for this, of like, let's think through a student's experience and strategy for that. Cause I think it's also, you think through strategy for like identifying unhealth with leaders, identifying unhealth with staff culture. Like there could be so many different things, but for the sake of this, we'll think of the funnel. So the top of the funnel is new students coming for some reason or another, right? Then you kind of move down the funnel and it's like second and third time guests. So they're not habitual attenders yet, but they are coming back, which is a good sign. Then we go to middle of the range. It's like they're consistently coming and they're consistently being like fed by the program, but maybe they're not really investing, right? So then we go down, and it's like somewhere down the funnel, they start to serve, whether that's in HSM or outside of HSM. That's huge. Maybe student leadership. We keep moving down the funnel. We see student leaders, we see inviters, we see, basically students that are engaging, the bottom of the funnel for HSM is we see high school students that are engaging with the church as a whole. So if we're to like put those little layers in there, then you're just going to be asking yourself, where are we not seeing what we think should be happening in this funnel?
Hmm.
And for us at Eastside, like I said, we're really strategic. And so we do look at numbers, but we look at numbers in creative ways, such as this 6 months ministry plan that we're in right now for HSM. We're measuring second time guests. We're measuring second time guests, and we're measuring if they're coming back. And we're looking at what's our first time guest to second time guest stats, and if there is, and I think there is currently a significant drop off, how do we improve that and what do we put in place? And so that's the question I've been bringing to all of our youth pastors at all of our campuses. what can we do better that helps us focus not just on the first time guest, but on the second time guest? And so, some of our awesome youth pastors at our campuses had amazing ideas. They were like, we need to have students actually text instead of just us. And I was like, that's great. It's little things, and they're not even groundbreaking ideas, but when you get so busy into just the grind of keep pumping stuff out, the things that you're actually maybe potentially losing for ministries that are especially bigger is just the one-on-one reach out to these second time guests. And so for us, that's actually our place that's like the hardest. First time guests we're amazing at. If people stay in the funnel, they'll keep growing down towards all of those more in-depth things. It's just that kind of second layer where we have to really be giving it some time and attention. And so, we have a goal, for Move Up Sunday, that every eighth grader coming in, that's going to be a freshman, we're going to have everyone try it once. That's our goal. And so if we don't see every name come through, we're going to be texting individually, which for especially our Anaheim campus, that's a tall task. We're looking at like a couple hundred students that we might be texting, but it's worth it because we're saying that's our weak point. And then with them coming back, we're having a student text and we're having a leader text. And one thing we implemented is that a student gets placed more automatically into small groups. And so that's something we've seen bring a lot of fruit. And that's a new strategy we have where when they check in and they're new, they kind of get dropped in our church database. It's getting really nerdy here, but they get dropped in our church database in what we jokingly call purgatory. We don't really believe in that, but that's just what we call it. And we then place them directly in a small group, and then they get an automated email that actually has a personal letter from that small group leader. So it goes straight to them, and a picture of their leader so they remember what they look like, because that's an obstacle, right? Because they'll be like, I don't really know whose group I was in the week before, because high schoolers have lives and they're not thinking, what was that person's name and what did they look like maybe the whole week? And so takes down one of the barriers to them coming back. And then the parents also get that, helps us build trust with the parents, helps the parents want to bring them back. So that's like one strategy piece that we implemented that we're actually seeing a lot of fruit from, because they might not remember their leader's name for weeks because, hey, they're in high school and they got other things to think about, but they suddenly remember their face and they can confidently walk up and see some of the other people in their group, and it helps that connection point for week 2. So that's like a strategy piece that we implemented. It's actually just using a resource we already have, which is our church database, more acutely to actually accomplish our goals of second time guests. So that would be how you kind of look at, where am I missing a spot? What kind of strategy can I build? And how can I use the tools I currently have to do that? And then think of some new ways to do it. And one thing that we're doing in real time that I would still say we're not the best at, but we're trying our best to grow in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really helpful example because you can do that in any area. Like maybe
Yeah.
you're really good at, you have a low attrition rate, right? You're like, students are coming and they're consistently coming back 2-3 times. I know for us, it's like, hey, I've got a big report that our database spits out. That's like, these are all the kids that have been here at least 3 times this semester. That's kind of what we, on a semester to semester basis, what we consider like a regular attender. Um, and I was excited, like for Easter, like we ran that report and there's tons of kids on there. And there was tons of kids on there that were like, this is the only touch point they have. Their parents aren't coming here. They're just coming here, but they're really being consistent, which is really encouraging. So I know for us, like going with your kind of like working down the funnel, thinking through where the choke point is, where the bottleneck is, for us, it was like, man, how do we engage those families and those parents, to start reaching whole family units? How do we start getting them connected to a deeper level of discipleship? Because we know that they're really enjoying what's happening on Wednesdays. They're really liking something that's happening there. So it's given me a lot of focus as a leader to say like, okay, now I know how to deploy my volunteers more strategically. Like now I know, say, hey, I do have a lot of things to focus on, but right now we're going to go after these, I mean, for us, there was like 150 kids that were on that, like coming regularly at my campus. Like they're here all the time, 3+ times, but this is the only thing they're doing. They're not coming on Sunday. Their parents are not involved. So like, okay, that's a huge list of like prospective students for us to start reaching out to those parents. And I was like stoked. Like after Easter, we had like 12 of those families show up on Sunday that have never been in the doors. And like
That's so good.
pro tip as a youth pastor, if you want to serve the vision of your senior pastor, campus pastor, whatever your context, like you're like, hey, like that is a huge win, that of like using your ministry to say like, hey, I care. Like I want to be a part of what God's doing across this whole church, like about reaching entire households for Christ. Like that's just a little tip, you should know that number, You should be able to
So
figure
good.
out and have all those names on a list, because like that's going to be really great, not just for your ministry, but for like your entire church. Of like, now
Yeah.
we're talking about connecting whole families to ministry, helping reach those parents. Hopefully that'll trickle into those parents discipling their kids. But I think that's just a lot of wisdom there, Sarah. So I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Hmm.
But just going back to the challenge question, what are maybe a couple other top challenges you feel like you're seeing um, with youth pastors today? Like things you're like, man, like these are just consistent things to be aware of, that are repeat conversations that you're seeing hit your team, other people that you're working
Yeah.
with.
Man, I think I think burnout, like we were saying earlier, is a big one. I think people are tired, and um I think that people aren't finding ways to refuel. So I think it's creating this mindset that like this should be working better, as something I hear from fellow youth pastors, or I feel like this should be growing, or I feel like this should be happening already, are some lines that I hear in conversation with youth pastors. And I think that it's a challenge and it's an obstacle, because I think I think some people getting into youth ministry think that like growth is easier than it is. Because I think we see how easy growth is, and maybe like
I've been here for
more,
4 months. Where are the
yeah,
kids? It's like,
exactly.
no, they don't remember your name. You don't probably don't
Yeah,
remember half of their names.
yeah.
It's not going to be magic.
It is so humbling, honestly. And honestly, when I started at my first ministry, I was 21. I was so just young, cutting my teeth. Like, I'd already done a few internships. I had a lot of experience, but not just like being the person, that is very different. And I had no expectations as far as growth. I literally was like, I'm just going to come in and bring my best and be as creative as I can. And I was
We're
like
just going to make
adorable.
sure we don't have any of the kids die this week.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a
I'd really
win. They all
simple.
got picked up.
Yeah, simple expectations, like so different. And I just was like, I'm gonna do events that I think are fun. Like, I just had honestly a more simple and naive mindset when it came to ministry. And it worked. I was patient
Yeah.
because I didn't know I was being patient. I was being consistent and faithful because I was just excited to just put on events and see students and just let it happen the way it was supposed to happen. And it's funny because going to the second job, now it's like, okay, I've been in ministry a long time. My first ministry grew from, with the help of my team and obviously the Lord and his fruit, from like 70 to 350. And so it was like, oh, I've done this. And so then starting at Eastside, I was like, oh, this is hard. I was like, okay, growing something and fixing something. And now I do have these expectations for what I can do and what the Lord can do. And I want to see that happen much faster now. And I think
Isn't,
that
isn't there a
is,
funny flip side though? Because I feel like depends on your personality. Like I'm a high faith vision, like that's always what's the driver. And I always felt like, especially early on in ministry, I'm like, we are going to crush this. And then you're like a semester in and you're like, oh, I think I suck at this. And I'm so discouraged. And I'm so like, am I just terrible? Like, what is happening? Like, why is this not working? I'm praying and we're teaching the word and we're running the plays. But like, I think in the flip side of that can be just as true of like,
sure.
sometimes you feel like your vision is so big and you're like, why isn't it happening? I don't
Hmm.
know if you've ever felt that way, and maybe
Hmm.
maybe with your transition to East Side, I want to keep, I interrupted you.
Yeah.
But like, how have you seen that be an obstacle too?
No, totally. I think that's how I felt coming to Eastside. Is I have this vision. I know what type of ministry that the Lord wants to do through me. I know why He brought me here. Like, I just felt like I had such clarity about that. And so I think I was like, "Hello, Lord. Like, I've made things healthy," which is like the saying that we've always said: "Healthy things grow." Right, God? Like, we've talked about that. Like, I just said that in this podcast. But I really was like, I got to a point where I was like, I have been trying to be as faithful as possible. I feel like I've been running a marathon uphill, is the
Mm.
expression I would use for my first year and a half or so at Eastside. And I remember having a really serious conversation with the Lord right before summer camp last year. And I was like, Lord, I feel like things are healthy. I feel like we've made changes we need to make. And I have always seen that be true, that healthy things grow. And honestly, God, I'm tired. Like, I don't know how much more I can give to this. in the way that I have. And I just was having that type of conversation with Lord. It's like, seriously, I can't do what I want to happen. Only you can do what I hope will happen. And we went to summer camp at this new camp, and we only brought, I think 68 students, because it was a new camp back to back years, and camp culture has been an uphill battle for us. And 34 of them made decisions for Jesus at
Oh
camp.
my gosh.
And so the Lord was like, okay, like it was finally like he did what only he could do. And I was just so thankful and grateful. But you will get to those conversations of like, this is hard. I'm tired. I feel like I've given it all I can give. I had given it a year and a half. It's not like I was like 2 months in being like, oh, hey, God, what are you doing? And I still was feeling like, what are you doing? This should be happening already. And then he did come through. And that's the testimony I want to give, is he did come through. We just have to keep being faithful and pushing and as much as we can until he does that. And he will do it. But I think that that's a challenge that youth ministry has and youth pastors have, is they think it will be sooner than it is. And
Yeah.
there can be this expectation that when I want it, it will happen. And then that's when the discouragement comes, and that's when the burnout comes, because they're not seeing it. So then a lot of youth pastors just think, is it me? No, it's the Lord's timing, and it's our job to be patient and faithful.
Yeah, I've heard it said like you can have it all, just not this year. Or not, you know what I mean? Like
That is
your
good.
vision can be achieved. Like
Mm-hmm.
yes, you can have the ministry, you can see like the thing that you're praying for and pleading for. That God wants that too. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like, will we have the patience? Will we have
Right.
the fortitude, like the dedication to sit there? I mean, that's Jesus' parable. The farmer goes out to sow seed, and he comes out the next morning, and he just looks at a plot of dirt, and he's like, "What the
Mm-hmm.
heck?" And then he
Mm-hmm.
goes in. He comes out the next morning, and then there's this huge, that all this has grown. It's like Jesus shares this short little parable, I think, for that principle of encouraging us to know, like, you know, we plant the gospel,
Yeah.
we water that, but just as Paul said, the Lord just gives the growth, but in His timing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
what have been some things you've
Yep.
done in your life to remind yourself of those truths, to be faithful, to be patient? Maybe some rhythms that you've got in your life, because I think that there's so much wisdom there, and you don't
Mm-hmm.
do ministry for 10 years without learning how to develop some healthy rhythms. So I think that you've got a lot of wisdom to share on that.
Yeah, I think the growing in patience, I think with ministry, it's talking to other youth pastors and realizing like the story I just shared is a lot of people's experience will help you grow in patience. So it is talking to fellow youth workers and talking to people about where they've been and being encouraged by their story with the Lord, and hearing about, and glorifying God for the growth that he's done in our ministries amongst each other. I think that's an important practice, is I think sometimes there can be this desire to compare or to gloat about stuff like that, but I think it's actually like important for us to talk about from the standpoint of, hey, you're in this really, tough season, but the Lord will show up, and he showed up in my ministry in this way, and to try to see it from that standpoint of giving the Lord glory and reflecting on seasons that were hard in ministry, but he came through. I think that's a practice. I think it's a choice, because I think when we find ourselves discouraged in ministry, we don't want to talk to others about it. And we don't want to be like, I've been trying all this and I feel like I'm failing, because it takes this ownership of like an expression of how you're feeling and the thoughts and, most likely lies you're believing about your ministry. And so I think it is having the diligence to still speak with other people that are in the trenches with you, even when you feel like you're failing, is something that
Mm,
has helped me over the almost 10 years now. I'm so fortunate. I part of my story that's unique and weird and only God is my identical twin sister is also in ministry full time. And so
mm,
she works at Saddleback. She's the uh what is her title? Next gen director of campuses or something like that. So she's really in it, and she is, she's doing big things every single day. And so she's the person that we get to talk to, like we're discouraged or whatever. And I think finding one of those people in your life, it's probably not going to be an identical twin, because I don't know how many identical twin youth pastors are out there. If you're out there, let me know. I'd love to meet you. But, is finding that person that you can be really honest with about disappointment and about where you feel like you're failing, and you will be actually straight up and not try to sugarcoat it or make it look prettier, because I think we all need that to last 10 years and more. And then I think obviously all the personal, like spiritual habits, we have to actually have those for ourselves, and that's like a totally, unrelated to being patient, but that's just seeing how the Lord works in the rest of our lives is so important to being able to have good perspective to see how he works in our ministries. I mean, we need to be able to be just closely in step with the Lord, and we need to honestly be able to hear his voice, outside of ministry, to be able to hear his voice inside of ministry. And that's something I really had to learn at a young age, because I was definitely thrown into leadership. I became the middle school director at that first church when I was 21. And I remember talking to my mentors, like, am I ready? Like, I don't know. I'm a little nervous. I kind of selfishly want to have this rookie season, where it's like, if I make mistakes, not that big of a deal because I'm just learning. But they kind of were like, you've never, you know, shirked any responsibility. You've always leaned in, and if the door's open, go for it. And so I did. But because of that, I definitely felt inadequate in a lot of ways. Even though I'd gone to school for it, I had multiple internships, all this stuff that you think would make yourself feel adequate, being thrown into ministry and to the leadership position so young, I had to really listen for God's voice. And luckily, I had already had that intimate relationship with him outside of ministry. And I would, hear his prompting and his leading and his spirit tug on my heart for different things. And that made all the difference in my ministry, was being able to really lean into that. And so I think that's something that every youth pastor needs to make sure is the starting point for literally everything we do. And again, it sounds like that should be obvious, but sometimes it really does get lost along the way. And if I didn't lean into that and have a lot of reminders to do that from the people around me, it would have made a huge detrimental difference in my ministry.
Yeah, I think it's critical to have a variety of voices in your life to help remind you of those kinds of things. That's partially like what we were talking about, why I do this podcast, is like why, because I've benefited so much from resources, but not just resources of like something you're listening to in the car when you're at the gym or whatever, but also like real coaches. I mean, I think about like the best athletes in the world. They've got coaches for everything. Like I'm a Kansas City guy, Patrick Mahomes lives down the street when he's living in KC. It's, like one of my guys in my small group was at like some golf charity. He was golfing and it was in the neighborhood. It's this really nice gated, obviously massive house.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure.
In the part of town that we're in, but he was doing a charity golf event, and he's like a, really high level. He's going to go play college baseball next year. This kid is a senior. But he was at this golf charity, and he's like, a golf ball like flew by his head, and he's like, he saw Patrick Mahomes roll up on a golf cart. He's like, sorry, bro, almost hit you, almost took your head off. He's like, oh, anytime, you can hit me in the golf ball anytime. He's like,
would have been the best day of my life.
Yeah, please, go to the hospital because Patrick Mahomes almost tried to kill me with the golf ball. Dream true.
Seriously,
but like watching that like quarterbacks thing on Netflix with that first season he was on there, it was like, it's just what it is. Like he's got a fitness guy and a mobility person and Andy Reid and a quarterback coach and like the guy who sits down with his finances. And it's just like, it's not really like, none of those people are better at football than he is. None of those people, half of those people have never played football in their life. They're just people that will challenge and push him in ways and make him do things that he won't do on his own. And I think like, that's like why you need people in your life to help develop you and to push you and to challenge you and to coach you. They don't need to be like the master guru of all things, and if you're looking for that, like that's partially, like I said, why I do this. Reach out to me, reach out to Sarah. I'm sure Sarah, I'm not going to sign you up for people to reach out to you, but I'm like,
no, it's great.
But like, that's why I just did an interview, episode coming with Kristen Lascola down in San Diego. Because she's like, that's why we developed, like how to grow your youthministry.com. And they have a course and coaching programs. It's not because they're trying to like swindle you out of money. It's because they're like, you need people in your life to like push you to do the things that you won't do on your own and to fill in those gaps and weaknesses to help you be better so you can reach more people. And so that, you can avoid these things of burnout. And sometimes it just takes, whether that's getting a professional ministry coach, or just getting a coffee once a month with a friend and a mentor, even somebody who's maybe in your church right now, who's just like, hey, I love you for you. It's not about what you produce. It's not about, you doing X, Y, Z in your ministry and numbers and all that stuff. I just want to love you and support you because I care about you. And it's like, I'm so grateful that the Lord's brought, 3 or 4 guys right now in my life that are all older in different ways, some spiritually, some, with their age and stuff, but just who are guys to like, just be like banner carriers for me, and to just
That's
ask
so
me
good.
questions about my life and my marriage and my relationship with Jesus. And, like, how are you? Like, I don't really,
Hmm.
yeah, we can talk about your ministry, but like, how are you? And I think that's so important to have people that, and I think as pastors, I don't know, I don't know, have you ever felt that, like, just isolation, where you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I don't know, maybe how have you faced those seasons and surrounded yourself with champions in your life? In seasons maybe where you felt a little lonely, feel like you're carrying
Yeah,
a
for
lot.
sure. I think I definitely learned it's lonely at the top, and because the Lord placed me there so early, it was tough. It really. I was the middle school director, but I still had like essentially peers that I worked with, and then a few years after that, at my first job, they asked me to take over the student ministries director role. So I was essentially, I want to say I was 25, um, and I was literally working with my peers, like the same age, which is, people have stories where they had to lead people way older than them, and that has difficulties. And then I had to lead people the same age as me, and that had difficulties because we went from being purely friends to I'm your boss, and
Yeah. Tricky.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, oh, this is hard, but it honestly, it was so good, and I'm grateful for that season because it really taught me like how should a boss really lead. And I think it should lead, my philosophy is like very in tandem with the people you work with. And authority doesn't mean respect. I think care and stuff like and support, gives you respect in those ways. But that's beside the point. But point being, I was lonely. Like I was lonely at the top, and I felt like people didn't truly understand the pressures I was facing with budgets and parents and upper leadership, because I was the one fielding all of that. And um I really had to reach out to people that were in the same position as me to try to just chat and find some support. And those people were mostly 10 or so years older than me. And I think that some young leaders that find themselves in leadership and feel isolated, they still won't reach out because they feel like they can't connect to older leaders. And I would just say, like, that's totally just a lie from the enemy that discourages us
So
from
true.
reaching out to people that could help us. And I've always found so much support in people that are 5, 10, 15 years older than me. And that's what I needed in that season. And uh, honestly, also, you can't wait for people to reach out to you. I didn't. If I would have waited for people to reach out to me to like be supportive or to be those landing places for me, I would have waited a really long time. And so I definitely was intentional in realizing I feel lonely and I need to do something about it and find some people that I can really talk to and feel like we have shared experiences with the areas that we're feeling lonely in. And then it's also like just having friends, like I think I also really needed in that season and still do just friends outside of ministry where I can just feel known as Sarah and not as Sarah, the youth pastor, or Sarah, the pastor, Sarah, the director, Sarah, the boss. And so when I feel lonely, sometimes it's definitely trying to figure out what about my current situation is making me feel lonely and how can I fix that?
Yeah. There's so much good stuff there. And to your point about taking initiative, I think being an initiative taker is one of those core leadership character qualities that's going to always
Yeah,
take you far.
definitely.
And especially in that area of mentoring, coaching, development, friendship. I think I found myself getting kind of weird and sticky and icky at times where I'm like, um, well, why aren't they reaching out to me? Well, why
Mm-hmm.
isn't this person calling me? Well, if they really
Mm-hmm.
cared, then they'd reach out. And I
Yeah.
think, like, to your point, like, that's just a voice of the enemy saying, yeah, yeah, you should wait. Yeah, you should wait to reach out. Yeah, screw that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
that
feel
is
even
on
more
them.
lonely.
Yeah, that'll stick it to them. Versus like that mindset of like, you think about the Israelites going through the desert, like they're just getting grumpy and God
Mm-hmm.
won't. This is Moses, they're just so
Mm-hmm.
icky. But it's like I love that story of like Joshua leading the Israelites, and it was when he took that step, and then they touched the Jordan. They had to take the first step. Then God parted
Yeah.
that thing, and He made a
Yeah.
way. And God's like, I will do it if you take this. If you take a step of faith, I can't make
Mm-hmm.
you take that step for you. I will
Mm-hmm.
fill in all the gaps. I will show, I will display my power and my care, and I have a great plan for you, but I need you to be faithful to take a step of action. So I think that's just a great principle of like taking initiative and I think this, your story is a great testament of that, of just saying, hey, in every season, I'm gonna reach out and I'm gonna take initiative to get around great
Yeah.
people that are going
Hmm.
to encourage me. I'm going to take a step of faith to name a lie that's going through my mind of insecurity or comparison or all these different things that can be so isolating, to get those things out and to get God's word and truth in, which I just think is impossible to do on your own, especially when you're in leadership and a ministry. Because like you said, it does get lonely at the top sometimes. And that's at the top of a ministry of a little country church with like 15 kids in your youth group, and you're part-time or you're just a parent and you're like, hey, I feel
Hmm.
like I don't know what I'm doing. And
Yeah.
but I don't know who to ask, and it just takes reaching out. So maybe
Hmm.
just a final word of encouragement. Just as we begin to wrap up here, just anything that you'd want to leave with anyone listening. That's maybe
Hmm.
serving in a role, leading a small group, leading a ministry, just needing some hope and some encouragement today.
Yeah. Man, I would just encourage everyone who's listening to this that these kids need you. These kids need you. And to not lose sight of that, I could get emotional about this. I probably will. And to do whatever it takes to last. I really, truly have had so many amazing examples of youth pastors in my life that have lasted 25 years in ministry, 30 years in ministry, and are still going. And I know that's not an example everybody who listens to this has, but I want you to know they're out there, and they're out there because they protected their calling and they respected the anointing the Lord put on their life. And they did what they could to make sure they had it in the tank to keep going. Doesn't mean that their every season was easy and there's this perfect formula. I know that personally for myself, but I think the number one way to keep going and is to realize these kids, they need us. The harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. And if you feel
Amen.
like you ought to be one of those workers, like we do, we got to do whatever we can to stay healthy, to stay motivated, to stay faithful. It's all the Lord asks for us is faithfulness. And I think sometimes we hear a lot of lies of expectations, whether that's from our leadership or ourselves or just so many different places. But we need to all ask ourselves, and I'm like talking to myself, as well, like, what are we supposed to be faithful to right now so that we can keep showing up for these kids that truly need us? Um, yeah, and that's my encouragement is like we can do this. We really can. We can stay in the game. I've seen people do it. It's the desire of my heart to do it. I pray and ask the Lord for strength for that every day to stay in the game. Um, but we have to help ourselves stay in the game too. And we can. And so that's what this space is for. That's what podcasts like these are for. And is to find some encouragement and to know there's other people that are trying to do this with us. And whether we are on a team or not on a team in our actual churches, we're on a team together and we're making a difference in the lives of these teenagers across our country and across the world for Jesus. And there's truly nothing more important or exciting than that.
Absolutely. That's so good. That's so good. Yeah. Thank you for that encouragement. I think that, like you said, there's not enough people that are willing to get their hands into this, and make a difference and step into the gap for kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you said, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about what you're seeing, out there in California. We've seen this amazing season of just spiritual hunger growing in the next
Yeah.
generation. I feel like
Yeah.
we're at a really unique time. And there's a lot of prophetic things there just about the end
Mm-hmm.
times. And, and I know everybody lands at a different place to those things, but I truly believe that in this last season, that Jesus is coming back and that we are
Mm-hmm.
in a day and an age where the world's getting darker, but that the
Mm-hmm.
light and the hope of Jesus is getting brighter, especially in America.
Mm-hmm.
And this generation is looking for hope, and they're looking for freedom, and they're looking for an answer of something that's not aggressive and violent and get behind this cause and get angry, but they're looking for real freedom from the
Yeah,
brokenness and sin in their life. And
they
that
are.
the answer is Jesus. And like what we get to do as pastors and leaders of people holding up God's word, with truth and authority, but also with a lot of love and grace,
Mm-hmm.
is giving them the answer to, what this world is seeking, and the only place that they'll ever really truly find it, and that's in their hope of an eternity in Christ. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for what you do.
100%.
Thank you
Mm-hmm.
for, the light and the hope that you are, to so many, to thousands of voices and people and parents and kids and students. to this expanding, to be to pastors and leaders around the country,
Yeah.
around the world where people are listening. So Sarah, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, get in contact with you, what's the next step for that? If anybody's like, man, I really resonate with her heart, I really want to get in touch. How can people track with you, see what you're up to, and maybe reach out?
Yeah, for sure. Like, honestly, the best way is just Instagram. I'm just Sarah Aungst. It's just my full name. And my last name is not the easiest. So it's Aungst. It sounds more like a sound than a name, but that's what German names will do for you. But yeah, so just reach out. Honestly, send me a little DM, and I'd love to connect and talk ideas. And I'm sure I can learn a lot from this community as well. And so I'd love to hear from whoever. And if you're like, I need help with strategy and I have no idea where to start, reach out, because that is literally something I could talk about all day, and just talk about really pinpointing the areas in your ministry that you need help. And yeah, I'm not a consultant. I don't have a business. I don't have a book. I don't have a blog. I don't have any of this stuff because I'm just in the trenches. But if you just want to reach out and just chat as friends, I'm here 100% and would love to talk.
Amazing. Well, thanks for your time, Sarah, and your encouragement. And this is awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode. If it was a blessing to you, my ask is that you would share this content with a friend, someone else in leadership and in ministry. I hope it was a blessing to you, and I hope that God blesses your ministry moving forward.